Well, good evening. I'll call the June 17th special meeting to order. We've got a couple things to discuss, but before we get any further, Peter, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, very good. All right, so we are here for the purpose of a marijuana regulations update pursuant to our moratorium. Hi, Peter, will you please introduce yourself for the record and go ahead and give your presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. Peter Beckwith, Assistant City Attorney. Just here to provide an update. You may recall back in November we implemented a moratorium. As part of that moratorium, there was a provision that said that staff would come back in about 6 months to give a kind of a status update on where we are. And so this is that status update. It's kind of the overview of what I'll be talking about. In the audience with us tonight, we have Isaac Conlon, the planning manager, and Chief Wong, and other members of the police department who, if I can't answer any questions that you may have, I may be turning to them. They're also here just to hear what you have to say. The ultimate result here is not so much to get any final action or specific direction, it's just to get kind of a flavor of where council may want to be going with marijuana regulations. So just a little bit of background. The issue of marijuana has been around for quite a while. In '98, Initiative I-692 legalized medical marijuana. That was just on the books. In 2011, the legislature passed engrossed Senate Bill 507, which expanded medical marijuana. But as part of that bill, they added a regulatory scheme, a registration. So if you were taking medical marijuana, you were supposed to register. At that time, there were some issues of concern about potential liability if state employees were participating in allowing marijuana to be kind of legal within the state. And so Governor Gregoire, she vetoed everything that had to do with the state regulating marijuana. As part of that veto, the bill was kind of intertwined and it cross-referenced to various portions. So when the veto occurred, it caused some confusion because portions that were cross-referenced in the non-vetoed sections, it wasn't clear how to interpret those because they were vetoed later on. So it's been kind of for medical marijuana, kind of a confusing kind of status at this point. And then 2012, Initiative 502 legalized recreational marijuana. And as a result of that, the city enacted the moratorium, which is good through November. So just talking about medical marijuana and what we're dealing with here. We often call it legalizing marijuana, medical marijuana, but it's really just an affirmative defense. It just says that if you're complying with this statute, you have a prescription, you have less than the 24 ounces, that you won't be charged criminally. So I like to kind of call it a get out of free jail card. It doesn't technically legalize it for business purposes. It's in the criminal context. One issue that came out of the confusion was this idea of collective gardens. The statute actually allows up to 10 people to participate in a collective garden. And up until earlier this year, it was just kind of assumed that collective gardens were allowed. And out of collective gardens came the dispensaries. So as you drive around, you may see the green crosses. Those are collective garden medical marijuana dispensaries. So they're not underneath the recreational marijuana scheme. However, earlier this year, a case out of the city of Kent came out where the court said that collective gardens are illegal. So all the dispensaries that you see currently, and often advertised with the green crosses, are illegal businesses. But they exist because just a lack of enforcement, and for some cities there's almost an open encouragement to allow that type of business to exist. So under medical marijuana, you can have up to 24 ounces with valid documentation. That's often called a prescription or a green card. There's no regulatory component that's associated with that. There's no specific tax, although the Department of Revenue is trying to track down some tax associated with that. But within the statute, it said that the city can regulate where it's grown. So they can use their zoning powers to regulate marijuana. And the city actually did that. A few years ago, we had 3 businesses that were trying to open medical marijuana dispensaries here in the city. One of them challenged the city. It went to the hearing examiner, and the hearing examiner upheld the city's position prohibiting those businesses from operating in the city. Moving to recreational marijuana, I grabbed this from the Seattle Times. Statewide, it passed 55%, King County 63%. Down in Federal Way, though, it was a little bit of a mixed bag, and that's what this illustrates. I couldn't find the precise precinct numbers, but as I recall at the time, it did pass within Federal Way a little bit above 50%. But as you can see, the greenish areas are where it was approved, and the pink areas are where it was rejected. So under recreational marijuana, it's regulated heavily by the state, and it's also taxed heavily by the state. Each step of the marijuana process is taxed. So in the growing stage, it's taxed at 25%. At the processing stage, it's taxed at 25%. And at the retail stage, it's taxed at 25%. Plus, there's sales tax on that and any potential B&O tax that might be applied. So under the recreational marijuana in the state, recreational marijuana is allowed if it's the state-regulated marijuana, if you're 21 years or older, and these are the limits that you're allowed to possess. So 1 ounce of marijuana, 7 grams of concentrate, 16 ounces of infused solid, your marijuana brownie, 72 ounces of infused liquid. Keep in mind that under recreational marijuana, it's a 1 ounce limit. Under medical marijuana, it was 24 ounces. So there's a significant difference between what you can have with recreational marijuana as opposed to medical marijuana. And marijuana that's not regulated within the state regulatory scheme, that's still illegal, except that you do fall back into, is that medical marijuana? And you have to do a medical marijuana analysis. So within I-502, there was some location restrictions on where these types of businesses could be located. They required that they be located 1,000 feet from this list: schools, playgrounds, child care centers. They're, for the most part, straightforward, but a few things just to be aware of. The definitions are going to take some time to be worked out. For example, you'll see that marijuana businesses need to be 1,000 feet from playgrounds. Those are public playgrounds. So if an HOA has a playground, it's not, they don't take that buffer into consideration. The child care centers, those are state licensed child care centers. Public parks is going to be an interesting one because they specifically exclude trails from parks. But if a park trail is excluded, might there be something else within a park that might be excluded from the buffer? The public transit center one, that's your park and rides, the parking garages, library. And the game arcade, that's kind of an interesting one, and I'll show it on the next map. So here's the city, and the green shaded area is where marijuana businesses could be located outside of those buffers. So you'll see some residential areas potentially down in the triangle area, the Weyerhaeuser property. most of the core is eliminated, and most of that is because of the arcade that's in the mall. And the mall is a really big piece of property, so it's 1,000 feet from the perimeter of the mall. But at some point, the Liquor Control Board may say that that's too big of a buffer, and they may tighten that up. I just don't know. We're working through that. So under the state regulatory system, it's controlled by the Liquor Control Board. They're authorized to adopt rules, and they've adopted rules for the producers, that's the growers, the processors, and the retailers. They've tried to limit the amount of marijuana that's grown. So statewide, the amount of area that they're allowing producers to grow marijuana is approximately 46 acres. So you can have as many producers, but in total, there can't be growing more than about 46 acres. It turns out to about, I think it's 2 million square feet. And on the retail side, they decided to limit it to 334 stores. And the idea behind this is they figured out how much marijuana will Washingtonians need, because they wanted to limit it to Washington, and they didn't want people from outside the state coming in. We'll see how that works. Within Federal Way, the Liquor Control Board has assigned up to 3 retail stores, so no more than 3, but unlimited amount of processors and producers. So far, they received 15 applications for those 3 spots within Federal Way, and they're currently in the process of processing those applications. The rules require that before they issue a license, they'll notify the city. And I'm not aware of getting any notification from Liquor Control Board. I'll look at PD and see if they're aware. So at this point, I'm not aware of any close to being issued applications for Federal Way. One of the issues that came up was if the Liquor Control Board issues a license, what role, if any, can local government have? And they made a request to the Attorney General's office, and earlier this year the Attorney General said that the local government still maintains its local zoning and regulatory powers. So even though the state may be licensing a business to operate within the city, does not mean that the city has to allow that business to operate. And the city can regulate where within the city that business can operate. So this map depicts where the 15 applicants are located. Some of them are within the buffer, those up north. So I don't anticipate that they'll get approved. The one up the north, it's right next to the transfer station there. But the ones to the south there are outside of the buffer, and so there are some places within the city where they can be located. I should mention the buffers that are here, this is staff's best guess of what Liquor Control Board will do. The buffers are actually determined by the Liquor Control Board, and they'll come out and they'll take measurements and they'll determine whether it's a valid playground, whether all those criteria that I previously showed. So like I said, this is our best guess. And some of them, like the child care centers, some of those are long-term, but some of them are here today, gone tomorrow. So they'll kind of be popping up here and there over the years. So nothing here is set in stone. At the federal government level, it's still illegal, so we haven't figured out what to do there. Back when Governor Gregoire vetoed the legislation, there was kind of a conflict between Eastern Washington and Western Washington, the AGs for those districts. Eastern Washington was more against marijuana than Western Washington. And they'd issued some opinions that said city employees or local government could be criminally liable for participating in an illegal activity of regulating marijuana. Since then, the Department of Justice back in DC has issued a formal opinion that basically says we've got a lot of things on our plate. If you're within our guidelines, we'll just kind of monitor, but we won't interfere. So we're kind of in a, we don't think that the federal government will interfere for the moment. I put up the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation just because this was interesting. So these are the folks that control the dams, and they've said that the water behind their dams that's used for irrigation cannot be used to grow marijuana. Probably not a big deal on this side of the state. Be interesting over on eastern Washington or places where they do rely on that water. At the federal government level, there's also some issues with banking since it is illegal. And so what's happening, they're trying to work through and get exceptions for this. And I think that they're moving along in that direction, but until then, these are primarily a cash-based business. And so not only do you have the marijuana that's attractive, you also have, for potentially criminal activity, you also have the cash that's there. And obviously, future administrations could be taking a different approach. That's just kind of the unknown at the federal government level. I'd mentioned the Department of Justice had issued some guidelines. These are those guidelines. They're pretty straightforward. Don't want it to go to minors, prevent criminal enterprise, trying to prevent diversion to states where it is illegal. That's where we get at the growing stage, trying to limit it to the 46 acres. Prevent for cover of illegal activity, etc. Always curious to know what other people are doing. Down in Pierce County, they've basically said it's prohibited until such time that marijuana is legal at the federal level. King County, they have a moratorium currently on medical marijuana, and they're researching recreational marijuana. It's my understanding that they're hoping to get a report and maybe have gotten a report already from their staff. Seattle's phasing out medical marijuana, so the dispensaries that are currently in Seattle, none of them are under the recreational scheme, so those should all be phased out within the year. And they've also zoned the recreational marijuana. And then Des Moines, just neighbor to the north, they just are zoning recreational marijuana. And these are all the businesses related to recreational marijuana. But the majority of cities are in Federal Way's position. They've enacted a moratorium. They're studying the issue. They're trying to see what everyone else is doing. There are some questions that the state needs to hopefully think about and do something about. I'd mentioned that recreational marijuana, the limit is 1 ounce. Medical marijuana, it's 24 ounces. Recreational marijuana is heavily regulated. Medical marijuana is not regulated at all. So there was an advisory report to the legislature in the last session suggesting that they combine medical and recreational marijuana into one regulatory scheme, just to be consistent. There's also an issue, I described the taxes. It's heavily taxed on the recreational side. A substantial portion of that tax goes to this basic health care plan, which was eliminated with the adoption of the Affordable Care Act at the federal level. So the first about $6 million of taxes is designated for some specific things, including funding for the Liquor Control Board. After that, 50% of the tax that's received goes to this basic health care plan. So the question is, now that that's no longer there, where should that money go? Currently, none of that tax goes to local government. So it might be a discussion to have with the local legislators here. to see if they would be willing to share some of that revenue. And then there's the question of will the legislature preempt the local regulations? Like I said, the court said that the cities can regulate marijuana. Within the medical marijuana statute, it says that cities can regulate and zone marijuana. I just don't know if the state will change its position on that. So what are the options the city has? There's the do nothing, the ban, or the regulate. The do nothing, ultimately it would be left up to the administration, the mayor, to figure out what to do. The ban is on the table, and regulating is on the table, not suggesting what exactly to do. The rest of the presentation, though, is focused on if the council decides to regulate marijuana, what are some of the issues to consider? The proposed timeline, if regulation is pursued, is set out here for ultimate adoption on October 7th, and the moratorium expires November 5th. If we can't keep to this timeline, we can always extend the moratorium. So just for some discussion purposes, here are just some thoughts, just to get the discussion going, but I also am curious what council has to say on the matter. You've been out amongst the citizens, you have your own opinions, so please don't think that this is what the discussion should be limited to. That second one, limiting marijuana businesses to the CE and CB zone, I've got a map after this that shows where those are. Imposing separation restrictions. If you zone these too narrowly, you ultimately end up with everything in kind of one area. Is that what we want, to have kind of an area of the city that has all the marijuana businesses? And there's some business regulations right now. We don't give business licenses to businesses that violate federal law, so we'd need to clean that up. And there may be some other business regulations that should go into effect to address the grow methods. As you can imagine, growing marijuana in here would probably occur inside under grow lights, and you just have some building issues associated with that. And also to address the cash-based business issues. And then to address potentially other marijuana-related businesses, the private clubs, the hookah bar, that type of activity. So those are just for discussion purposes. Here's the map that shows where marijuana can be grown. I think a suggestion would be to not have it in residential, which would eliminate where it is in that gray area. That's both multifamily and single family. And then what I had on the previous slide was allowing it in community business and commercial enterprise, which is the orange and red areas. So with that, my portion of the presentation is over, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Councilmember Moore.
Thank you so much for your presentation here. If you can just go back a second ago with this slide. Oh, the last slide.
Oh.
Can you mention what you said? I want to hear it again with the residential parts that you can. I just want you to repeat what you just said.
Sure. So on this slide, the area that's in gray is single family and multifamily residential.
And a proposal.
The suggestion would be
Okay.
not to allow it in those areas. It probably can't go there anyway. One of the things the Liquor Control Board looks at when issuing licenses, they won't issue a license where law enforcement isn't allowed to just generally go. So law enforcement can't just generally walk into someone's house, and so they wouldn't issue a license for a house, is my understanding. So just to be clear, if we zone it, that we would just eliminate that issue altogether and say not in residential.
And just for a follow-up, and I appreciate that last part because there's a concern that I have with that in apartments and condominiums for people to be growing pot and distributing it out. So that's a concern that I have, just to put out there on the table. So I want us to kind of address that, and it looks like we may be doing that. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, at this time, I need to formally excuse Councilmember Maloney, who's not available for tonight's meeting. Are there any other, is there any discussion about this? You know, obviously, there's the three options, and maybe what we can do is talk about, you know, going back to the three, really the fork in the road here. Do nothing, ban, or regulate. I think, you know, Mr. Beckwith, Peter's presentation really kind of deals with the option of regulating, and Councilmember Duclos.
I think we need to seriously look at regulating, but I think we also very seriously need to go back to the legislature and make sure that the city gets money from that. The city is able to tax like we do other businesses. So I think that's a very, very strong thing, because we're the ones that are going to be dealing with any fallout,
Right,
not the state.
that's right.
So, and I think we should make that a #1 priority on our legislative agenda.
That's right. So before we go any further, is there any support for a ban? All right, so I think now we're looking at regulation, and obviously for our legislative agenda, we'll be addressing that. So moving forward on regulation, is this something that, Peter, while we've got that time frame, it goes to the commission first. Can we look at the time frame again? So is there, August 6th, is everything in place to take this to the planning commission on August 6th?
No.
Okay, so what would need to, is August 6th a viable date to take this to the planning commission moving forward?
I believe so.
Okay, and then it would be presented, their findings would be presented to LUTC on September 8th?
What would go on August 6th would actually be the proposed regulations, and they'd primarily be land use regulations, and you'd have that public hearing, and then Planning Commission would be making a recommendation to the Land Use Committee.
Okay, so that really only gives them, that would really only give them one meeting at the Planning Commission to be able to really come up with their findings, assuming one meeting in August, to bring to the LUTC. Is that enough meetings for the Planning Commission? I think as Isaac, as you head over there, Isaac Cunlin, as he's making over his way to the podium, Councilmember Honda.
I would, excuse me, I would just be concerned that this is a topic that the Planning Commission needs to discuss, but there's other topics too, so I wouldn't want to put too much pressure on them to just come up with a decision on this when we have other things that are pressing also. Maybe they would need more time.
Okay.
Yes, right, I think, you know, we can't speak for the Planning Commission, so either they do have enough information to make a decision at that first meeting, or they don't. And if they don't, it's fine in terms of timing, because like Mr. Beckwith said, we can always extend the moratorium if we need to. So then we just go to the next Planning Commission meeting, and you know, that actually still might give us enough time to meet this schedule, but if at some point we recognize that it doesn't, we can just extend the moratorium to a point where we do have enough time to, you know, make reasonable consideration, make a thoughtful decision on this topic.
And actually, we do have that time frame factored in where we're missing a second meeting in October. You could actually shift the council decision. Yeah, well, I'm looking at the second meeting in October could be the second reading, and then the first meeting in October could be the first reading. So we do have some time factored in if we wanted to move that around. Council, other than the timing issue, Councilmember Duclos.
Oh, the only other thing is we probably could contact Sound Cities Association, because there have been 1 or 2 cities that have already adopted things, and we could contact them, and we could actually ask them if they have information from other cities. They could put it out, the question for us, and then it could come back here, so we could see what other cities are looking at and what some have actually adopted.
That's a good idea. Peter, are you aware of other cities that have adopted this and that we can get some information from them?
Well, I'm aware of, for example, Des Moines, that was just a zoning where they allowed it within a specific zone. I'm aware of what Seattle did. I have access to most of what they did, but I know that Sound Cities, I'm sure, has got a nice presentation. Yeah, the Municipal Research and Services Center, MRSC, has a very nice page that actually links to the actual ordinances. So we can compile all of that information.
Councilmember Selski?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'm somewhat concerned about the dichotomy between the federal law and the state law now. I mean, I've been somewhat confused about that. And looking at one of the slides, Peter, it says that Pierce County prohibited, I guess, recreational marijuana until the change in the federal law. Do you know anything more about that? Are they working toward any end here, or is it just they've just kind of just shut it off? And is that
My reading is it's, for all intents and purposes, it's a ban. And that's what they wanted to go with, but they linked it to the reason for the ban is because of the federal law.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if there's any interest in pursuing that angle right there at all. Again, just because of the confusion between the federal and the state law at this point.
And what are you proposing?
That maybe we follow that same path. It's on one of the slides. It's on the slide titled "Response by Others." Right there, the very top one. But that wouldn't mean that we would just, put our head in the sand. We'd have to continue to work towards some end, because eventually the federal law may change, and therefore the state law takes precedence. So that's what I'm confused on. What really takes precedence?
That's a good question. I think a lot of communities are really feeling their way through this. Well, perhaps maybe we end up there after. I guess the question is, at this stage, are we comfortable? You know what? Before we go there, Mr. Hills has we do have this down for public comment. Tracy Hills, would you like to come in on this issue real quickly? I've received a pink sheet.
I don't think you guys should legalize it, because already there's been 2 cities are getting sued for it. So either try to do it or I don't know. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tracy. Appreciate it. Okay, council is in. Right now, I think the presumptive plan is to take this before Planning Commission. Is there generally consensus on that proposal, and we'll see where we're at with that? Is there any other discussion? Councilmember Selski.
Yeah, I guess this is a question for Isaac. We do have, Councilmember Honda mentioned this, we do have other things that the Planning Commission is working on. Is there anything really critical that will fall out if we put this one ahead of others?
Yeah, nothing like that. We also have the group homes code update, which is critical also because of the moratorium issue.
Mm-hmm.
But we can, at this point, we can work on both of those or other issues at the same time. So it's not an either-or situation. We can keep these things going on sort of parallel tracks. So, no.
We do have the 2015 comp plan update, right? But is this a different staff member or whatever that's working on this, Vice?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, yep, that's correct.
So that won't interfere with that process?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Council, any further discussion? All right. Well, I think the consensus is that we're on to the Planning Commission. Thank you very much. Now we're on to the second part of the meeting, which is executive session to evaluate qualifications of employees pursuant to RCW 4230-1101G. We are in recess to accomplish that executive session.